American community in Seattle, Washington. And they collaborated with some folks at other sites who had had experience doing this in other cities, in particular in New York City. Um, so the New York sites were included on the abstract as well as some representatives from the partner organizations that were involved in presenting this education. So they served as co-authors as well. Um, and you can see the objective that they laid out was to describe the fact that in Seattle, the African American community is small, but is disproportionately impacted by HIV, and has a high rate of incidence of new cases. So they felt that it was appropriate to spend some extra time and energy to provide education to that specific African American community. They partnered with some stakeholder groups who served that community and had reach into that community as partners in presenting their educational offerings that helped to organize um, the meeting where education would be presented. And so you can see in the methods section, they described who they were working with. They targeted a one-day workshop. They used a particular training model referred to as the precede proceed model. So that would have been something that they found in their literature search, describing a way of designing an educational offering. And they proceeded to plan their workshop. So they described how they set their learning objectives. They assessed the knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs that the audience already had. They looked at what kinds of things would enable and reinforce behaviors. And they went ahead and planned their workshop accordingly. They also described their goal for how the attendance that they wanted to achieve, that they thought would be a meaningful outcome. And then in their results section, they described what came about. So they talked about the advantages of using a curriculum that had already been tested in New York and how did that work for them in Seattle. They did reach and in fact exceeded their attendance goal, so they were able to talk about that success. They did have a smaller number of people complete evaluations than they would have liked, but of the ones that they received, people found the session informative and rated the presentation as good, very good, or excellent. Their partners who assisted them in planning also had positive feedback and considered the program successful. And then they were able to plan a subsequent event where they held a movie screening and went from having 60 people at the one-day workshop to 110 people who came to the second program. So they started to build upon their efforts and reach an even wider audience. So they concluded that that particular learning model was a useful framework for them to use. They highlighted the benefits of building these relationships with the community collaboration and having this coalition of partners was an important criterion. They also noted how the barriers that they had identified about addressing distrust and addressing past medical exploitation. How did that play out? And some of the important content. So the fact that they were able in their workshop to really describe and educate about informed consent was important. And you'll see here they did describe their limitations. So they did have a small number of evaluations completed. So they would like to be able to have a more complete evaluation process. and they weren't able to collect demographic information about their attendees. So that would be something that, given the opportunity, they might do that differently so that they could collect that information. This was an abstract that was accepted for oral presentation. And Michelle, I know you're on the line and you were one of the authors. Is there anything else you'd like to say about this effort?
Just maybe a few of the logistics. There were a lot of authors involved. So very early on, because we were submitting it as an oral presentation, we discussed, if it were to be accepted, who would be presenting at the conference, who would be traveling to the conference, just to get all those logistics out ahead of time so that once the abstract is accepted, it's clear what the expectations are. Because when you have so many authors and many of those authors are community members, you don't want to set up expectations that if the abstract is accepted, everyone will be supported to travel, attend, and present, because that's just often not feasible. Most of the times, not feasible. So that's one of the things that I thought helped.
Perfect. Thank you. Very valuable. And they presented that at the U.S. Conference on HIV and AIDS, was the venue for that particular presentation. Let me stop sharing there and pull up another example. Oh, shoot. Hang on a second. I think oh, that's interesting. It won't let me minimize Zoom while I'm recording. Can I make it a smaller window? There we go. The next one was a presentation done at the International AIDS Conference, which is held every 2 years. This specific one was from 2010. I think that was in Vienna, if I'm not mistaken. And let me share my screen. Too many windows open, it's hard. So this is one that I worked on with several site community educators and recruiters. A couple of names who you'll recognize are still in their positions, John and Jorge in New York. I'm sure many of you remember Jim, our former manager, and Kim. And this was about the process of training recruiters, because we recognized that while many positions among the site staff are really defined by a particular professional credential, people who are a nurse or a pharmacist or a physician and so forth. The role of recruiter doesn't necessarily have this defined educational association with a particular degree. And so the recruitment staff come from many backgrounds and have many different kinds of skill sets. But among them is the fact that they are people who enjoy interacting with other people. They are outgoing and friendly. And so to train them by sitting them in a room and lecturing at them is not always the most effective way to train them, because they need to be they are people who are suited to being active and moving about. So we described our 3-day training workshop. It was held in Chicago, and I believe it was for the 505 study that we were preparing for some years back. And so we wanted to talk about how we created this interactive training workshop that got people moving about and doing interactive lessons, how we got out into the community and actually did some things out on the streets of Chicago, and how we presented it. So Um, Again, you'll see there that we talked about our training objectives, that we wanted to describe a variety of kinds of recruitment strategies. We wanted to build interpersonal skills. We wanted to build their ability to explain science to laypersons, and increase their connections with their peers so that people would have some relationships in place. If they got stuck, they would know who the staff at other sites were that they could reach out to for support and to share information. Um, and our lessons learned, we talked about how important it was that we had these interactive and practical application opportunities. Um, we described a tactic. Some of you may have seen this before. We've used it a number of times over the years. We refer to it as the human scavenger hunt. Um, and I'll show you what that looked like in a moment. And we also talked about the fact that it was valuable to have trainers who reflected diversity. So people of different sexual orientation, people of different genders, people of different races or ethnicities. So it wasn't, you know, the groups of people that were involved in presenting as the trainers were as diverse as the audiences that we work with. And we noted that our next steps, our future directions were that this kind of interactive training needed to continue. And we felt that it could be adapted across sites and adapted for different regions as well. So this one was accepted as a poster, and let me pull that poster up to show you. Just one second. Oh, come on, now my mouse is giving me fits. Sorry. There we go. So this is a colorful poster that you will see. And I know it's really teeny tiny print. I would not expect anyone to be able to actually read this. I am going to make these files available to Jasmine to share with you when she sends out the recording. We'll send out all these attachments as well. So the poster, we included the abstract itself at the top so people could see the same exact summary that we submitted to the conference. It was actually printed right on the poster. We included photographs of our trainees and some of the sessions. And so we highlighted from our evaluation data what people felt were the successes. So it helped people interact. It allowed us to practice the skills in the field. Helped me figure out how to say things and put it in my own words. Again, lots of photographs showing people getting up and about, moving around. We included our training objectives from the workshop. We included our training concepts, the topic areas that we were training about were included. And then we used the photos with captions to describe what occurred at the training so that people could get a sense of what had happened. And then I mentioned the scavenger hunt. So our border all around the edge were the items on the scavenger hunt. And it's really teeny tiny print. Let me enlarge it a little bit there. So the group that was going around in the neighborhood had to practice the skill of just stopping someone on the street and starting up a conversation. So they needed to find somebody who knew what the word placebo means, someone who knew where they could get tested for HIV, someone who could name a disease that has been eradicated by a vaccine, somebody who knows the difference between a rapid test and a standard HIV test, someone who thinks that HIV vaccines are important, and so on. So all around the border of the poster were these elements from the scavenger hunt that people we're looking for. And so again, practicing that skill of being able to just start talking to someone right up, straight up off the bat, be able to start a conversation and be talking about HIV and sexual health, and initiate that conversation. You can see here some of the, now that I've enlarged it a bit, maybe you can read some of these captions on the photos a little bit, where we describe what was actually happening in the various sessions. Any questions about this one? And again, you'll get the copies of this so that you can actually spend time to read them and be able to see them more clearly. I'm sure on my little screen, it's hard to see such small print.
Gail, can I just raise one point?
Please.
Yeah, so many of you will notice the very stark difference between an oral abstract and this poster abstract. You know, one being the length. Often the word count is different. So I think it really brings your attention to the fact that you really need to make sure that you're reading the specifics of what is expected of the abstracts that you're submitting, because even for the same conference, there could be different expectations with regard to the word count, the length, the contents of the abstract, whether it's oral or poster for that presentation or for that conference, excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Thank you. Stop the share on that one. And then I've got two examples that we submitted to the HIV R4P conference. The first was from 2014, and this was about implementing GPP, something that I know many of you are familiar with. Make it bigger. And so this was, we wrote this together with the leadership from the HVTN 505 protocol team, because it had to do with the implementation of oral PrEP. So some of you have been around long enough and will remember that in the middle of the 505 study, the study was in progress. That was when the results from the IPREX trial became available, and the implementation of Truvada as oral PrEP began. The FDA gave its first approval for that. And so the protocol team had to respond to this change in the prevention landscape and decide what they were going to do to accommodate that change in the prevention landscape. Oh, hang on a second. I see, oh, people are just signing in. Okay, I saw the chat numbers go up. I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing a question. So this abstract, we described about how we engaged the community to give guidance about how we might revise the protocol to accommodate the implementation of oral PrEP. And we talked about the fact that community members had been part of the protocol team from the very beginning, that we surveyed study participants themselves about their intention to use PrEP. We held consultations with the Global CAB, and we also held a consultation with a wider group of external community stakeholders. And we talked about, we sought out rather their advice on how PrEP could be provided to participants that were interested in using it. And then subsequently, we did another round of consultations once the FDA approval came out. Initially, it was just the fact that PrEP had been found to be successful, but then once it was approved, we had a second step there. So in our results, we shared that The stakeholders that had been consulted felt strongly that people needed to be educated about PrEP and counseled about how they might access it. And as a result, the study was revised, and we incorporated the possibility that not only might participants be getting the study vaccine, but they also might have some uptake of oral PrEP. The protocol team worked out a system where it could be made available free of charge if there were participants who were interested in using it. And that this has become an evolving discussion because it had implications rather for future studies. And so we concluded that GPP had been something really key, that we were able to continue our practices of community involvement to consult about this unique situation, and really build upon the community's input to enable us to make a change, because of new information that came about during an ongoing study. So let me show you that poster as well. And we presented this, and here again, you're going to see that there's a ton of words. It's teeny tiny print. But we presented our efforts as like a roadmap. And so again, here on the left is the full content of the abstract in the gray shaded box. And on the right, this bullet pointed list was all of the different groups and groups of people and groups as in organizations that participated in our consultation. So we listed out the range of stakeholders who had been involved in the consultations. And then we used our roadmap to show all the different steps that we followed. We also highlighted how these corresponded to good participatory practice. So here at the top, we actually copied from the GPP publication the specific elements of GPP that we felt we were implementing. So we were talking about transparency, about what the standard of HIV prevention was, and the fact that with the availability of oral PrEP, that standard was changing. And how was this relevant? How was this ethical? So we laid out the GPP principles that we were following. And then our roadmap, with the road signs, had the date for each of the steps along the way and described the different steps in our process for seeking input and holding these various consultation meetings. So I know that that's super teeny tiny and you probably can't hardly see it, but again, a way of describing our process, showing all the steps along the way, who was involved, and I think it's interesting that GPP is one of the areas where we spend a lot of time teaching people about GPP, and AVAC has made all of the wonderful training materials and curriculum available for people to learn about GPP. But there's not much in the literature about doing GPP. And so I would say that this is an area where probably lots of you have something that you could share, that there just isn't a big body of literature yet about how people actually are implementing good participatory practices. So that might be something to think about. Are there elements within the GPP guidance that you might be able to elaborate on and showcase your work and how that work is connected to GPP? Any questions about this one?
I'm just going to chime in one more time.
Please.
recently, Hank submitted a poster abstract looking at the engagement of women in HIV research, and they used sort of that the road that illustration,
Mhm.
and people were really engaged by that at the conference, and it was very easy to follow. It really sparked a lot of conversation. So, I know we're talking about abstracts, but your poster and the way you present it is really going to be a huge factor in drawing people in, bringing people over to your poster. So, just look at what other people have done, talk to people about what they've found, has really been engaging for people at the conference to inform your development of your poster as well, because I think that that's such
Absolutely.
a good illustration, that roadmap, something that people can easily follow and really engage with.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And I often think of it as, you know, if I was going to make a slide set to present, what kind of graphics would I put on my slides? How would I illustrate the talking point? Um, and if you think about some of the slide sets that you've seen in the HVTN over the years, right? We've got our immunology and vaccinology, where we compare it to a sandwich, or the immune system being like a tree, right? So there's some metaphors that really lend themselves to pictures. And you can think about how can you use that sort of picture or metaphor on a bigger scale to illustrate a poster. It's a really great point, Michelle. Thank you. All right, let me share the last abstract example for today. This was also submitted to the HIV R4P conference. This was in 2016 in Madrid. And we talked, no, I take that back. 2016 was Chicago. This was where we presented the process by which we had um, developed animated videos in support of the AMP studies. And um, this was a group of us at CORE, and Aliza Norwood was one of the investigators in San Francisco at that time. And I'm sure some of you who have been around for a while will remember this because you were probably involved in the consultation groups that we held. Let me make this one bigger also. So we described the fact that we had these new trials. They involved new concepts that were unfamiliar to people. People hadn't heard of BNABs before. And we needed to, excuse me, we needed to educate about these new concepts. Pardon me. So using the community-based participatory research approach, we identified a series of steps where we would engage with members of the community and the protocol team and our stakeholders at each of the different stages of video development. And in working with the video vendor, we identified where were the places that we needed to get that input and feedback as we were moving forward. So we started by getting input on the scripts and so on. So our methods, we conducted these various consultations. We provided the detailed feedback to our video developer, our vendor. And we continued the editing process until stakeholders were satisfied with the outcome. They were initially videos developed in the US because that study was opening first. And then we used the US as sort of our baseline and showed that to our different international groups to get feedback about how to revise that initial American video to make it appropriate for international use. And we did that in Latin America and in Africa, both. And so we talked about the fact that we followed the same process of community-based participatory research in all of the 10 countries to adapt the videos for each country. Our results, we shared that we had funding that enabled us to hold a certain number of in-person consultations and involving people with a range of roles and skills. There were some delays in the protocol itself, but that did mean also that sometimes there was limited time for review, and so we had to work quickly and ask people to turn their feedback around on a tight timeline. And you know, we said that if we're accepted, we would show a sample video. As it turned out, we were accepted as a poster, so we couldn't show a video, but I'll show you how we address that in our actual poster. Our conclusion was that developing videos using the community-based participatory research approach is feasible and it was cost-effective. It resulted in materials that were acceptable to communities, and helped us avoid leaving out any subpopulations. And it enabled us to easily explain some complicated concepts. And we talked about future efforts, wanting to evaluate these efforts. So let me take that down and show you the poster itself. Here it is. See the key to enlarge it. So again, the abstract itself is shown on the left. We again use this idea of showing the timeline across the bottom where all the different steps occurred. I'm so sorry, I can't seem to make this one bigger. I don't know why it's not letting me do that. We showed an example of the script and how it's all marked up with track changes that came out of the feedback sessions that we held. I know it's impossible to read, but it's got yellow highlighting and red text showing the track changes. We showed how that script got developed into the screenplay, because the screenplay had to include things like, you know, while this sentence is being said, here's what's happening in the animation. You know, this globe is going to start spinning or what have you. So we showed an example of how the script became a screenplay. And then we also showed this process that I think all of us at CORE learned. We had not previously been involved in developing an animated video, and so there was something called an animatic, where the video developers provided a two-dimensional sketch to show us the sort of idea that they were thinking of to illustrate a point, and then what did it actually look like in the finished video. So we did kind of a before and after. We shared some of the information about our costs, lessons learned. Here's all of the steps in the process and the methods by which we obtained input in all of the different regions. Again, I'm sure this will be a lot more useful to you when I send out the copies so that you can see it bigger and actually read through it yourself. But you can see that, you know, the different ways of presenting information to help illustrate the steps along the way. Michelle and Linda, I know you're both on the call. Anything you'd like to add about this one?
No, Gail, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, no, as well. It was a fun project.
It was a fun project.
Yeah, it
We all
was.
learned a lot.
Definitely, definitely.
They never taught me in graduate school how to make an animated video. So here I was able to blow it up just a little bit. Hopefully that helps a little. So again, you know, lots of different ways of presenting information. You know, the posters really let you be very creative with your visual elements in how you share the information. And it gives everybody a chance to display their work. But I think what I love about the process abstracts is, again, this idea that the body of community engagement literature is thin. There's just not as much written up about what it is that you all do every day. So this is really a chance for you to think about the work that you've done, specific efforts that you've been involved in, programs that you've created. I'm trying to think of some of the boy, Blossom, I know that you've got processes you've written some of them up that we've published in Community Compass, and you've presented about them. Mar, I was thinking about the flash mob that you did for AMP and how you got that group of people together to dance in the square in support of the AMP study. So lots of examples of all of you have for creative kinds of programming that you've done that you could think about writing up those processes. Michelle, did you want to add something?
Yeah, and I would look at the themes of the upcoming
Yes.
Conferences. For example, I think it's IAS. Their theme is people first, putting people first. And that is something that I know all of you do all of the time. So how do you do that? What processes have you found to be helpful? One of the major public health threats around the world is increasing vaccine hesitancy and mistrust in public health institutions. And I know all of you are involved in efforts to educate communities, to put yourselves out there as trusted sources of information, of healthcare, et cetera. So these things are incredibly important for people to see and hear, to inform their efforts to do these things around the world. And I really do believe that many of the people on this call are leaders in this area. So it's really important to get that out there so that others can see why you're successful, how you're doing what you do, and potentially replicate that where they're doing their work.
Yes, 100%, all of that. Michelle just mentioned the IAS, the International AIDS Conference, is coming up this in July. It will be held in Munich, and the deadline for abstract submissions for that is week or two, or recall if it's the 22nd or 23rd. So if you're able to work quickly, that's the conference first, may be able to 23rd. You may be able to get something submitted to that meeting by next week. The other one, they haven't announced the theme yet, but the HIV R4P, HIV Research for Prevention Conference, that will be coming up later in the year, I believe in September, and it's due to be held in Peru. So I would say, especially for our Latin American sites, that's really going to be an opportunity for you all to be at that international meeting. Certainly the travel expenses will be less because you'll have a shorter distance to go. But that'll be another one to watch for. They haven't yet announced the abstract submission timeline for that meeting, but it'll be coming up, I'm sure, in a few months. So some things to keep an eye on, and we'll try our best to keep you all informed of those deadlines as they come up. So we've got about 9 minutes remaining. Any questions from anyone? You've all been very quiet this morning.
Hi, Gail. This is Jerissa from the Nashville site.
Hi.
Please excuse my voice. I'm overcoming a cold.
No problem.
My question is, and you may have already addressed this, so I apologize in advance if I'm asking you to repeat yourself. But when it comes to collecting that data, especially if, say, if a site were interested in collecting some data around demographics for studies that the HVTN has done, what is the process in requesting that if we were wanting to utilize that in an abstract submission?
So, Michelle we've covered this a bit on previous calls. Some of it is data that you may already have, because, for example, you probably keep track of things like how many people you've screened and how many people you've enrolled, and you probably know something about the ages and genders and races and ethnicities of those people that you've interacted with already. So it may be a set of data that you have. If it's from an HVTN protocol and you want to use the data from that protocol, then you need to go through the HVTN Scientific Review Committee process, which involves reaching out to the study chairs and seeking their permission to use that data. If it's a study that's already been published and you're just having to refer to an already, published paper that has already, that data is already in the public sphere, then you wouldn't necessarily need to do that because it's already published and readily available. So it's really just when the study's still in progress or if it hasn't yet been published that you need to make sure that you're obtaining that permission from the protocol team and going through the SRC process.
Thank you, Gail.
Sure, sure. And that's one of the things when you're describing a process like these abstracts I've shown today, it's less about the data collection, right? You're really describing your workflow and your thought process as a you might have some data, for example, the first oral presentation of Michelle's that I showed where they had a goal of having 50 people attend and they were able to document that in fact they had met and exceeded that goal. So that's a pretty simple sort of data collection, because you're just counting people. You're not sharing any personal information. But that was also part of their lessons learned that they wished that they had collected demographic data. So if they were to repeat that effort in the future, they might take steps to have permission to actually, go through an IRB to have permission to collect data about the people who attended. Other questions? Alrighty, well, I will include all of these samples, the 4 abstracts and the 3 posters will get shared when Jasmine puts out the recording. She'll post all of those examples as well so that you'll be able to look at them on your own screen where you can enlarge them as much as you'd like and actually be able to read them without squinting. But as always, if you see a conference coming up, if you want our help, if you need someone to brainstorm with, we are here to assist you, and please feel free to reach out at any point. If any of you are going to try to put something together to submit for next week, and you want another pair of eyeballs to read it, we're happy to be reviewers and give you some comments back. We're certainly doing that for each other here at the network. So we're happy to do it for you as well. And we wish you well. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and take good care till we talk again next month. Thank you.